The letter was duct-taped to my front door, not mailed, not dropped in the box, taped like some passive-aggressive middle school breakup. "Urgent HOA notice, final warning," it screamed in bold red letters. I peeled it off and read through the ridiculousness. Apparently, I owed 4 years of unpaid HOA dues totaling $6,000. Problem was, I paid in full every year, on time, with receipts. I'm Xavier Barlow. I'm not the guy you want to mess with over paperwork. I'm a structural engineer by trade, but I've got a side hobby, catching people who think rules only apply to others. And our HOA president, Brenda Raskin, was that exact type. She was exactly what you'd picture early 50s, high-volume blonde perm, always wore that one red power suit like she was running for HOA president of the world. She once fined my neighbor for having a non-regulation garden gnome. Said it was a safety hazard. So when I got hit with this fake back dues claim, I didn't yell. I didn't call. I printed out every receipt for the last 4 years, highlighted the payment confirmations, and strolled right into the HOA office at the edge of the neighborhood. Brenda was sitting behind the desk like she was expecting me. Well, Xavier," she said, folding her hands like she was headmistress of some HOA-run boarding school. "Took you long enough to respond. We've given you multiple notices." "No, Brenda," I said, dropping the folder of receipts on her desk. "You gave me one notice, duct taped to my door like a ransom note, and here's proof I've paid every cent." She didn't even open it. I'm afraid it's too late for that. "The board reviewed your status yesterday. There's now an additional late penalty." "You're making that up," I said flatly. "I don't make the rules," she said with a fake smile. "I just enforce them." She was lying, I knew it, and that smug little smile told me there was more to this. So I left without arguing. Let her think she won, but I had a theory. That HOA office, it sat on a weird wedge of land that used to belong to the original development contractor before the HOA even existed. I remembered because I helped do some early surveying work in the area years ago. Something about that plot never got transferred properly. That night, I pulled out my old files. Then I went to the county land records office and spent 4 hours digging, and there it was, that little strip of land, including the HOA office. Still registered to a holding company I'd bought 5 years ago as part of a side business flipping lots. I'd completely forgotten I even still owned it. The HOA didn't own their own office, I did, and they'd never paid a cent in rent. I didn't sleep that night. Barely blinked. The realization that Brenda had been issuing threats from a building she didn't legally hold the right to occupy lit something in me I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not even satisfaction, just a razor-sharp clarity. I was going to hold her and every last one of her cronies accountable, and I was going to do it the right way. The next morning, I called up a friend of mine, Rick Holloway, real estate attorney. Sharp as a tack, and more importantly, he owed me a favor. Years ago, I helped him save his family's cabin from a shady contractor who tried to declare it condemned. Now, I needed his expertise. "She's holding meetings, issuing fines, and storing records in a building she doesn't legally occupy," Rick said, flipping through the parcel documents I'd scanned and emailed over. "Zav, that's not just civil overstep, that's unauthorized use of private property. Depending on how long they've been in there, you could be looking at property theft, maybe even wire fraud if they've used that office as a base for collecting payments. They've been operating out of there for over a decade," I said. "And I've never signed over usage or charged rent." Rick leaned back in his chair, whistling low. "You want to go nuclear?" I didn't answer right away. I already knew the answer. So did he. By noon, I drafted a formal notice of trespass and unlawful occupancy. Rick helped me notarize it and file copies with the county clerk's office. Then I printed it, framed it, and walked it right into the HOA's so-called headquarters. The door creaked when I stepped inside. The place was quiet except for the distant hum of an old printer. Brenda was at her desk, flipping through a binder like she was auditing someone's flower bed. "Back again," she said without looking up. I placed the framed notice directly on top of her binder. At first, she didn't react. Then she read the bold title and her mouth parted slightly. "You're joking." "No, you've got 72 hours to vacate the premises. After that, I start charging rent at double market rate." She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back into the wall. "This is a community property. You can't just— It's not community property. It never was." "And you knew that, didn't you?" Her jaw tightened. She glanced toward the office door, then back at the notice. "You don't understand the logistics here. We're the governing body. We make the rules. You enforce bylaws, Brenda. You don't get to fabricate debt, lie about ownership, or squat in an office you don't pay for." She pointed a finger at me, trembling slightly. "This is harassment." "No, Brenda, this is documentation, and I've got more of it." I turned and left before she could respond. I needed to move fast. If the HOA had been using that building as their legal address for years, every notice, fine, and policy change they'd issued from it was potentially invalid. That meant the entire operation could unravel if handled right. That evening, I met with a few neighbors: Jeannie from 2 doors down, Malik, who ran the local hardware store, and Gloria, a retired nurse who'd been fined twice for excessive porch decoration. I laid everything out: land ownership, false back dues, the trespassing. Jeannie was the first to speak. "So we've been paying fees to an organization operating illegally." "Technically, yes," I said. "They've been using this address as their headquarters despite never having the legal right to occupy it." Malik laughed. "So what's the plan? Kick him out." "Not just that," I said. "We expose the whole thing. I want transparency, audits, and if we find any real crimes, we let the law handle it." Gloria's eyes narrowed. "They forged a debt. That's mail fraud if they sent notices." "I say we document everything and take it to the DA." That was the moment the wheels really started turning. We formed a small task group, just 5 of us to start. We called ourselves the Property Rights Committee. Quiet and under the radar. Our goal was simple: gather every piece of documentation we could about the HOA's operations. Meeting minutes, financial statements, communications. Anything and everything. Gloria requested copies of the last 5 years' budgets under the Freedom of Information Act, citing her right as a dues-paying member. Brenda delayed for days, then finally emailed a PDF that looked like it had been thrown together by a teenager. Numbers didn't line up. Account names were vague. There were payments listed to companies that didn't exist. Jeannie, who worked as a forensic accountant before retiring, started cross-referencing vendor payments. She found over $20,000 in landscaping maintenance fees paid to a company called Green Horizon Solutions. Problem was, the company had no business license, no website, no employees. It was a shell, and the address listed. A P.O. box in Brenda's maiden name. We couldn't go to the HOA board, they were all handpicked by Brenda, but we could go higher. Rick helped us file a formal complaint with the state's Department of Consumer Affairs. We attached every bit of evidence: false debt claims, illegal occupancy, fraudulent vendor payments. We also sent a copy to the county district attorney's office. The response came faster than we expected. 2 days later, a black SUV pulled up outside the HOA office. 2 investigators from the DA's office stepped out, badges visible on their belts. Malik called me immediately. "They're here," he whispered. "Real serious-looking guys." One of them just took photos of the front door. I grabbed my keys and drove over. By the time I arrived, Brenda was outside, arms crossed, trying to maintain composure while the investigators questioned her. One of them nodded to me as I approached. "Mr. Barlow, that's me. We've reviewed the complaint. Can you confirm you're the legal owner of this property?" "I can. Records are filed with the county clerk. I've never leased or licensed it for HOA use." Brenda cut in, voice sharp. "This is a misunderstanding. We've used this space for years. And yet you've never paid rent," the investigator replied. "That's not a misunderstanding, ma'am. That's unlawful occupancy." She opened her mouth again, but the other agent held up a hand. "We'll need full access to the building." All files, digital and paper. Brenda hesitated. Then, reluctantly, unlocked the front door. Over the next 3 hours, they boxed up files, photographed documents, and took statements. I stayed out of their way, watching from across the street with Gloria and Jeannie. By sunset, they sealed the door and left with 3 file boxes and 2 hard drives. The next morning, a county-issued notice was taped to the office door. This property is under investigation. All official HOA functions are temporarily suspended pending review. Residents started showing up one by one reading it. Word spread like wildfire. At noon, I got a call from Brenda. "You think you've won," she said, voice hoarse. "But you've just disrupted everything. Garbage pickups, security patrols, maintenance, they're all suspended now. This whole neighborhood's going to fall apart." "No, Brenda," I said. "It's finally going to come together without you." She hung up. That night, I drafted a lease agreement. Effective immediately, the HOA could remain in the building at double the current market rent. Monthly, payable to me. Failure to comply would result in a formal eviction. I emailed it to the board's general inbox. The next morning, no one showed up at the office. The lights were off. The door remained locked, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt calm. The real work was just beginning. But the grip Brenda had over the community, it was already broken. By the end of the week, the sealed office sat untouched. No one from the board had dared open it again, not with the county seal bolted to the door and the investigators' warnings hanging heavy in the air. The neighborhood, meanwhile, was adjusting in a way no one anticipated. Contrary to Brenda's threats, the sky didn't fall. Trash still got picked up. The grass still got cut. Turns out, most of those services weren't even coordinated by the HOA. They were contracted directly by the city through a long-standing infrastructure agreement that predated the HOA's formation. On Saturday morning, I got a call from Rick. "They're moving faster than I expected," he said. "The DA's office wants to meet with you. Monday, 2 o'clock. I paused. "They give any reason?" "Yeah, they're building a case, and they want your committee's evidence formally introduced." I met Rick outside the district attorney's municipal office. The assistant DA, a sharply dressed woman named Talia Nguyen, greeted us in the conference room. Her tone was brisk but focused. "We've reviewed the documentation regarding unauthorized occupancy and fraudulent financial records," she began. "It's bad. But what concerns us more is what we found in the computer systems seized from the office." She gestured to a laptop connected to the wall monitor. It displayed a spreadsheet, long columns of names, numbers, and notes. "These," she said, "are resident accounts. But many of the names listed here don't match the actual property owners. Several homes have been flagged with overdue dues, interest penalties, and lien notices, but the payments recorded don't match the amounts demanded. In at least 9 cases, we found discrepancies in the thousands." Rick leaned forward. "Are you saying they were inflating lien amounts and pocketing the difference?" "Exactly," she said, "and it gets worse. There are transferred payments funds routed from the HOA's operating account into a shell nonprofit. That nonprofit was registered under a different name, but the signature on the incorporation paperwork matches one we've seen before." She clicked to the next slide. Brenda's name appeared on the screen, alongside a scanned signature and a notarized document registering a nonprofit called Community Enrichment Fund. Its mailing address, a storage unit just outside town. "They were embezzling," I said flatly. "Systematically," Talia replied. "And laundering it through a fake community outreach program. We estimate over $70,000 siphoned over 6 years. Rick exhaled slowly. "What do you need from us?" "Testimony. Particularly yours, Mr. Barlow. You're the legal owner of the property they used. That gives you standing in the case, and we need your entire committee prepared to give depositions." "I'll get them ready," I said. "What about arrests?" Talia nodded. "Warrants are pending. We're coordinating with the sheriff's department to make sure this is handled properly." By the time I stepped back outside, the breeze felt different. The whole neighborhood had been under a fog of control for so long that I didn't realize how good it felt to breathe clean air again. That night, I met with the rest of the committee at Gloria's house. Her living room was already set up like a planning center, 2 laptops open, a corkboard pinned with timelines, and a pile of evidence packets she'd organized herself. I laid out what Talia had told us. They want all 5 of us to give depositions. They're moving fast. This thing's going to trial. Malik tapped his pen on the table. You think they'll try to run? They won't get far, I said. The DA's already flagged their accounts. Jeannie looked up from her notes. We should prepare the neighborhood. If this goes public, people are going to have questions, and the last thing we need is Brenda's loyalists trying to spin this. Agreed, I said. We hold a meeting. Wednesday night, we'll present the facts. Let the neighborhood see the truth for themselves. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Gloria drafted a presentation. Malik set up a projector in the community park. Jeannie pulled bank statements and made copies. I spent most of Tuesday coordinating with the DA's office to make sure we didn't compromise the investigation while informing our neighbors. Wednesday arrived with a strange energy. People showed up early, some out of curiosity, others clearly sensing that something big was about to drop. By sundown, nearly 100 residents were seated on folding chairs, murmuring quietly as the projector lit up the screen. I stepped up first. Thanks for coming, I said. What we're about to share may shock you, but everything is documented. Everything is real. I walked them through the property records first, how the HOA had squatted on private land without permission for over a decade. Then Gloria took over, showing the budget inconsistencies. Jeannie followed, highlighting the shell company payments. And finally, Malik displayed the spreadsheet recovered from the HOA office, pointing out the false debt entries tied to real residents. There were gasps. A few whispered curses. Several people began flipping through the evidence packets we'd handed out. One man in the front row, a retired firefighter named Carl, stood up. You're saying they hit us with fake fines, then funneled our payments into a fake nonprofit? Yes, I said, and we have confirmation from the district attorney. Arrests are coming. A woman near the back raised her hand. What happens to the HOA now? Rick stood then, speaking for the first time that night. Once the investigation concludes, the HOA's charter can be dissolved by a vote or restructured under court supervision. But until then, all enforcement actions are suspended. No new fines. No new rules. The crowd erupted into scattered applause, not raucous but relieved. Like a pressure valve finally releasing, 3 days later the sheriff's department made their move. Brenda was arrested outside a golf course clubhouse on the outskirts of town. 2 other board members, including the treasurer and secretary, were taken from their homes in coordinated sweeps. The charges were serious: wire fraud, embezzlement, falsification of public records, and unlawful occupancy of private property. I watched the coverage on the local news with a strange mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. Seeing Brenda in cuffs, her red blazer wrinkled and askew, was surreal. For years, she had acted untouchable. Now she was facing the very laws she'd twisted to control others. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. People waved at each other more. Conversations happened over fences. A group of teens even offered to repaint the worn benches in the park. Without the constant fear of fines or letters, people started reclaiming their space. Talia called me the following week. Grand jury indicted all 3. Trial date will be set soon. Your depositions were solid. Any clue how long it'll run? Hard to say, but restitution's on the table. If we can prove how much was taken, the court can order repayment. I laughed. They'll need a few bake sales. She chuckled once, then shifted tone. There's something else. We found records of a planned annexation. They were trying to absorb a nearby block of homes into the HOA without proper votes. Paperwork was halfway filed. My stomach turned. They were expanding, trying to. Illegally. We've halted the process and flagged the filings. That night, I met again with the committee. We didn't meet in someone's living room this time. We used the old HOA office. With permission from the DA, we'd been granted temporary stewardship of it until the case concluded. We'd repurposed it into a community resource center, no authority, no fines, just neighbor helping neighbor. We sat around the old conference table, the air finally cleared of all the pretension and pressure that had once clung to those walls. This all started with a single fake debt, Jeannie said quietly. Imagine how many people just paid without questioning. Not anymore, I said. Not here. Outside, the porch lights along the street flickered on. Kids laughed in the distance. And for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood finally felt like home. The court date was set for a Thursday in late September, just as the leaves around the neighborhood started to turn that brittle gold. It had been nearly 5 months since the arrests, and the community had changed in quiet but unmistakable ways. Lawns looked a little wilder, less manicured, more personal. A few kids had started a weekend lemonade stand on the corner without anyone threatening to shut it down for unauthorized commerce. And nobody was scared to speak their mind at the monthly open forums we now held in the old HOA office, which we'd renamed the Common House. But beneath all of it, we knew the trial would determine whether any of this lasted. Inside the courtroom, Brenda sat at the defense table between her two attorneys. Her hair was flatter than usual, and her blazer was gray this time, likely an attempt to soften her image. She didn't look at me as I took my seat behind the prosecution's table with Rick and the other committee members. The charges had ballooned since the investigation began. What started as unauthorized occupancy and wire fraud had grown into something darker. The authorities had uncovered a second set of digital ledgers, encrypted and buried in a hidden partition on the HOA's server. What they found wasn't just embezzlement. It was targeted financial retaliation. Dozens of residents had been systematically overcharged, not randomly, but selectively those who had challenged the board in any way. Some had been fined for non-existent violations, and then faced liens when they couldn't pay. In 3 cases, elderly homeowners had lost their homes after being forced into foreclosure proceedings initiated by the HOA's legal counsel, who, as it turned out, had been receiving undisclosed kickbacks through a private escrow service. The DA introduced this evidence in the opening statement, and the courtroom fell into a silence so complete it felt like the air had been sucked out. Brenda's attorneys objected, of course claimed the accounts were misinterpreted, claimed the board had no knowledge of the deeper financial operations. But the prosecution had a witness they hadn't shared with anyone outside their office, Darren Fielding, former HOA bookkeeper. He was gaunt, eyes hollow, like someone who hadn't slept properly in years. When he took the stand, his voice shook, but his words were clear. "They told me to create 2 sets of books," he said, looking straight ahead. One for the public record, and one they called the Stability Ledger. That's where they tracked additional enforcement fees. Brenda said it was necessary to keep problem residents in line. The defense tried to paint him as a disgruntled employee, but Rick had anticipated that. He'd found emails, real ones, pulled from Brenda's laptop, which showed Darren raising ethical concerns months before he quit. In one, Brenda replied with a single sentence that now echoed through the courtroom. "Sometimes, order requires discomfort." The trial lasted 6 days. I testified on the 4th, answering questions from both sides about the property ownership, the lease Brenda had ignored, and the subsequent attempt to use that location to process fraudulent fines. The cross-examination tried to poke holes in the timing of the discovery, but the facts were solid. The parcel had remained in my name, no transfer, no lease, no easement. The HOA had operated there as squatters, then used the address to create a false legitimacy for their enforcement actions. On the final day, the prosecution dropped one last hammer. A recorded phone call between Brenda and the HOA secretary, captured by accident through a connected voicemail system. In it, Brenda laughed as she discussed a family that had just paid a $500 nuisance fee for a portable basketball hoop. "They'll pay anything if the envelope's threatening enough," she said. "People fear official-looking paper more than they fear God." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty, on all counts. Brenda was sentenced to 16 years with no possibility of parole for at least 10. Her co-conspirators received slightly less, but all were barred from ever holding fiduciary or administrative roles in any organization again. Restitution was ordered. The court appointed a forensic accountant to begin the process of recovering stolen funds through asset liquidation. Brenda's second home, a lakeside property in Vermont, was seized and sold. The proceeds were split among the residents who had suffered the largest losses. After the sentencing, as we stood outside the courthouse under a sky that looked cleaner than it had any right to be, Gloria turned to me. "Do you think it's actually over?" I looked around. Jeannie was talking to an older couple who had nearly lost their home to one of Brenda's crooked liens. Malik was helping a reporter from the local paper verify the timeline of events. Rick was already on the phone with someone, probably explaining how to set up a transitional governance model. "I think the worst of it is," I said. "But we've still got work to do," and we did. The neighborhood voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. With the board indicted and the charter under legal suspension, the process was surprisingly smooth. We transitioned into a voluntary neighborhood association, one with zero enforcement powers and a rotating leadership model. No fines, no surveillance, just communication and cooperation. The common house became a real community hub. We hosted workshops budgeting, gardening, even a class Malik taught on how to read service contracts so no one got scammed by repair companies again. Kids used the back room for a weekend art club. Someone donated a piano. Gloria started teaching lessons. I leased the office space to the new association for $1 a year, a symbolic gesture. Rick told me I could easily charge market rate, but I wasn't interested in making money off it, not after everything. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail, not duct-taped, not threatening. It was hand-addressed and sealed neatly. Inside was a thank you card, no signature, just a note in neat cursive, "You gave us back our neighborhood, thank you." I didn't recognize the handwriting, I didn't need to. It was enough to know people had noticed. That evening, I sat on my porch as the sun dipped below the rooftops and kids played catch in the street. No one yelled at them. No one took pictures for violations. The world didn't change overnight, but our corner of it had. We had stood up to something rotten, and we won not just with the law but with each other.